John in Denver. Oh, John Denver, that's funny. It's 2:02. We'll call the meeting to order. It's now 2:03. Jump back here. We'll start with the approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to have a look? Any comments, edits? I wasn't here last meeting, so I'll abstain. Do we have a motion?
Not yet.
Not yet. Have a look.
I'm looking at it a second time. I did look
Sure.
at it. I just didn't see anything that I...
So you moved and you're waiting for a second now? So-
No motion yet.
No motion,
Just
still
waiting
reading.
for a motion or any comments, anything. Give it another minute.
This one sentence here, the board discussed the water quantity available according to the city engineer was not easily acceptable. Not a complete sentence at some point.
Where does it say that?
It's on the second page. And it's, about the third and fourth line down. Fourth line. The board discussed the water quantity available according to the city engineer was not easily accessible. We could probably do a little better than that.
How do you think it was the city engineer who's not easily accessible?
Didn't read it that way.
Hi, Rosemary.
So maybe which,
Oh, hi, Rosemary.
which according to this,
I think the board discussed that the water quantity available to this, we discussed the water quantity available.
Maybe move, well,
And then say, if you could have, you could put a comma in there, the amount of water quality available, comma, and according to the city engineer, that is not, is not easily accessible.
which
Which would work.
according to the,
It works, and that's a fine statement to make.
Okay.
Is that okay?
yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
anything else? Would you like to make a motion with the amendment, Arnie?
Sure, I'll move to with the amendment, move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Arnie makes a motion.
Any further discussion?
Mike seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
So you didn't vote though?
Aye.
Oh, you didn't?
Yeah,
Okay.
now I did. Okay, motion passes. Citizens to be heard? No citizens. Anyone have any board and staff reports?
I will mention that our drought planning workshop is next week after the MOP meeting on Wednesday, so that's going to take place on Thursday afternoon from 1 to 5 at the GWISA offices, and Friday from 8 to 12 at the GWISA offices. Mike and Rosemary and I will be attending that at this point in time. We've struggled a little bit with the financing.
You attending?
Yeah, a little financing for that.
Who all is attending, Arnie, besides?
From this group, the three of us right here, and is there someone else from the city? I thought we had three people. Yes, Levi's from the city is also attending. We just the brief scenario is that we had a little trouble with some of the financing. GRISA has decided to drop out of financing, but they do want to be part of the project. Their board won't allow them to finance it at this point in time, but they're still supporting the project, giving us a place to meet and perhaps some food items and something to drink also. And Dana and another person's name, what's her name? Dale will be attending for GRISA. They haven't dropped out, the board just doesn't want to finance it. And we've picked up another $1,500 from the BLM to make up for that. So we're still at $7,500, and I haven't really talked to the Forest Service, who will be attending, to see if I can squeeze any money out of them. So we're on at this point in time. We shouldn't have any problems with it. And I'm looking forward to a great workshop.
And it's the VCAPS workshop?
Yeah, the VCAPS workshop.
And did you see that Zachariah said that he might be able to contribute more if we can't get the?
I did see that, yeah, and so, see how much it's worth to them, I think, and see how beneficial it is, and maybe we can squeeze a little more out of them. They'd like 10,000, we're at 7,500 now.
What did you say the date and time was?
The date and time, it's kind of a closed meeting at this point in time, but it's next Thursday and Friday, 1 to 5, and 8 to 12, is that correct?
I think that's right.
Yeah. Okay, that's, I think that's all from my staff reports at this point.
Can I
Has
ask,
everybody had their, I'm sorry, has everybody had their interviews yet?
Everybody's been interviewed? You've been interviewed, haven't you? Yeah, everybody's been interviewed.
can you clarify what's happening at the mob meeting next Wednesday?
Yes, I can. We will have a discussion with, as per the request of a couple of a special meeting that was not a quorum of anybody. There were some county council people there, some planning commission people there, and some city people there, as well as some groundwater experts. And there was a discussion whether or not our monitoring in Spanish Valley was enough to guarantee we knew how much water we were using and whether we were mining our water tables. And the answer between the scientists there at the discussion was no. And I was requested to work with Mark Stilson to see if we could discuss that further. And he, of course, was willing. James Greer wasn't quite as amenable. And I suggested we use the MOP as the venue to have a discussion for a monitoring plan for the Spanish Valley groundwater.
And that's at 1.
That's from 1 to 3 next week. And he said, I'm going to give him 45 minutes. He said he needed 35. He really wanted, some of this stuff will actually be discussed in the meeting. He requested that Chris Wilcox of the USGS be there because they have been doing some monitoring on wells in March every year. And they're supposed to be providing some information to the water rights people on that, and usually it's about one paragraph in the end of their report for Spanish Valley because they do a lot of the state. And 3 years ago they said we needed to make that a little better, so to speak. That's what Mark asked of Chris at that meeting. And Chris is not able to attend, and I pushed him saying that we really needed somebody who's actually doing the monitoring to be here, or somebody from the USGS, and he is sending somebody from Salt Lake City who is apparently now the person overseeing the last of the draft of our report. So supposedly they're knowledgeable about the area. I also requested that the UGS be there. I may push their button again too to see if I can get them there too. Okay, on the side, James Greer was not positive, was not supportive of spending more money to monitor this area. And I was a little disappointed in that because it's really their responsibility, the way I see it. And they do it in other areas around the state. But James Greer would be the man that holds the funds, not Mark Stilson. Mark Stilson is very supportive of us doing more monitoring in this area. And the discussion was mostly centered around whether we need dedicated monitoring wells as opposed to wells that are pumped. And that's basically where we're trending at this point in time. And then who would do the work?
So that's
That'll be a discussion that will be next week.
cool.
Okay?
So is that monitoring just quantity of water,
It would be, we'd be monitoring the water
Groundwater
levels of the groundwater.
but no quality, like no?
Well, there may be some quality involved. At some point in time, when you put a hole in the ground and you want to know what the water quality is, so that you realize what aquifer you're in and which water you're actually measuring. So there probably would be some water quality involved. Okay, and then when you have a monitoring well, all of a sudden other people want to have it sampled for other reasons. Okay, the state keeps track of nitrate, and they might want to sample for nitrate occasionally and things like that. But that would be a sidebar from the goal of the Spanish Valley Groundwater Monitoring Project. Okay.
Mike, did you have something, Mike? Or you had a question? Board
Forgot
report?
what it was now. Oh, well, no, when we get around to council reports, with your discretion, maybe we could pick up Chuck, because Chuck mentioned in particular he had a question about our fact sheet. So just so we don't have to necessarily make Chuck hang around any longer than he wants to. You pick him up pretty quick.
So
Sure.
we're still doing staff reports.
Yep.
I'm done.
You're done? Okay, now,
Finished.
I wasn't here last month, I got hurt, so, but apparently we talked about the letter here with numbers as far as water availability goes.
And that's actually it's an agenda item,
Okay,
discussing that.
all right, well, we can, Chuck and I wanted to talk a little, okay, we can
Okay.
wait.
Are there any other board reports? I'll ask that, and if not, we'll move on and get to those. Yeah.
So I'm going to go to the forest plan meeting next week with Oscar, the new head of public works. He's going to be taking over the writing herd on that process. Next week's meeting is about wilderness values and grazing. And so the city's interest would be about grazing in our watershed. And then Kalen has an interest in attending also, so more power to him. So I think all three of us will go to that. And there's a new coordinator, so it's all in flux with the forest planners. But as you all know, they want to put off approving that new forest plan until after the next presidential election. That's their unofficial stance on that. And if you haven't heard, I am retiring, so we're working on a transition, and Arnie is going to help take minutes in the interim.
And I would like to throw Eve's going away party.
Are we going to throw it someplace fun, or are we going to throw
Yes.
it here?
That's why I want to throw it.
Thanks, Eve. Does anyone else have anything now? Oh, go ahead.
No,
No? Okay.
Oh, I have a quick one.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't know if everybody saw, but the article went out in Moab happening, so I'll pass it around. And haven't forgotten about the irrigation idea about having the irrigators in, but no one is calling me back. But I tried a few people again today, and I met with Greg Fossey about identifying a few topics where we could do some water seminars over at the water reclamation plant. Because they have a nice new conference room. It's small, but we'll do a couple of lunch and learns.
Sounds good. If no one has anything else, we'll move on to other business, and that is,
May I interpose a
yeah.
question, if now's a good time?
Uh-huh.
So Chuck, you, maybe to finish.
Is this for a discussion of the water fact sheet?
No,
Or
this is
something else?
just more of a
Okay,
staff report. My
sure. No, go ahead.
apologies.
Yep.
So I have been working on a text document, a little short word summary, which would just summarize the USGS and the Calm report for council, to make it less technical and so forth. And then perhaps a PowerPoint presentation as well to show to them at the times we try to present a better estimate of safe yield and usable water, which is an interesting subject. Not just how much water is there out there, but how much realistically might we be able to pick up and what would it cost? How would we do it? But in the process of trying to do all that, I took a closer look at Ken's report, and that's when I realized, as you guys already did, that there were some errors in it. So anyway, Chuck, you told me that Ken, we compiled a list of problems that we saw in his report. I don't know if you passed those on to Ken or not, but. Okay. So when are we gonna hear from him?
I got the report last week, so you're gonna get it today or tomorrow. So I haven't even looked at it. But what Ken did after he met with y'all and with us is they went back and took a hard look at their report and basically revised it.
Okay.
And they have a high confidence level in it now. So what I would suggest we do is I think you should, I'm suggesting we do it, you guys do as you wish, is you hold off on this memo to council, because I think you've got some math errors in that water facts stuff. I think we all should just take a minute, look at the numbers, get them as correct as we all got them. If it takes 2 weeks to do that, I don't see where that's really an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then issue whatever you're gonna issue.
Okay.
And I'll develop my number, whatever. What he told me he did is he stopped the low range and high range. Remember he had that? And they came up with an average. He thinks that was confusing to people. Remember, and I think there was some confusion about the low range and high range because it was based on stratified usage, consumptive usage. So they went back and went to an average method. And then they had a conversion error. Remember, I think you pointed out, Mike. And I think there's an error on your water fact sheet where you didn't reduce the surface water flow, but I don't think that's, I don't even want to debate that right now. I've looked at it, I think it needs to be. I think what you'll want to do is look at Ken's report. We're going to look at Ken's report.
Yeah.
Then you can say, because the basis of your water facts numbers were some kind of combination of Ken's numbers and my numbers, right?
No, the water effects numbers mostly came from documents that were.
No, some of those numbers are exactly out of my memo, the 9,000 and the 11,000. But that's okay.
That's in the memo, that's our memo, not the water facts sheet.
No, it was, because I just saw your letter to the council. I
Yes.
just saw it today.
Okay, that's the letter to the council.
No, it was the water facts. Well, what I'd suggest is I'm not prepared to hang up and do the math today. I think, let me go push send on the Ken Combe report, which he feels high confidence level in now. Let you guys look at it. We're gonna look at it. See if we can reach an agreement on what it really means. Then we're all at least working on the same numbers. If we don't, that's okay. Differences of opinion are fine. But if we can agree upon that, then that lets everyone be using the same numbers moving forward. And I think that's a positive thing. And if not, I would just say that Ken took your comments and our comments seriously, went back, revised the report. I think it's probably a better report. I've discussed it with him. I haven't looked at it.
Okay.
We've been busy doing, as you know, some other things. And that's what I suggest. We could just take a few weeks, look at those numbers.
Okay. So you say you've received it from Ken then? You
I
haven't?
have it. I got it. I'm gonna go, he sent it to me today as a PDF. I'm gonna
Okay, so can you
forward it
is
to you. I'll forward it to Eve and she can send it to everybody.
that'd be great. We can chew it on again. That's fine. So let's see, the water fact sheet, you said a math there. I thought you were looking at something specific. Can you point to anything in particular you're having a problem with?
And maybe it's not the water fact sheet. Which one is it?
So this is our water fact sheet.
Mark,
These
It's
numbers.
the one that you published with what the available water is. Is that this one or was that the memo?
I think the water fact sheet was attached to the memo. Am I getting that right?
Here's the memo. Does it look like that one?
That's the memo.
It's the memo.
That was the premise for
It's
it.
not the water fact sheet, yeah.
but
Yeah, it's the-
Mark we had some discussions about the water fact sheet as well. So
We did.
it's not that we're-
It's the one-page memo.
But
Okay.
this one, it's the estimated surface water.
Okay, we came up with that number probably from Ken Combs' report.
And I think what you did, and again, I didn't bring mine, is you reduced the groundwater, but you didn't reduce the surface water based on the effects of climate change. We remember that's what we did, is we all reduced by 20%.
Yep.
And I think you didn't reduce the surface water by 20%. So that's an artificially large number, because if the groundwater reduces by 20%, the surface water would reduce by 20% as well. Yeah, thanks. And all I'm suggesting is let's get Ken's report, look at it, because now it's I think it's going to be a much more accurate document.
I think,
And by the way, sorry, Eric, just to finish it up, I did, the fellow from UGS, Hugh, is that his name?
Yeah, Hugh.
He and I are playing phone tag to get them to do peer review on Ken's report. So we think that's a good idea too. So, but that's not gonna be in 2 weeks, right? It'll take them a while to do that. So Mike, the answer to your question is that Ken's report, you guys, I'll send it to you this afternoon, because I just got it at the end of the week.
Yeah.
Let's all look at it, take a couple weeks. Because there's nothing that burning that we can't wait a couple weeks, I think, for us to get our numbers
Oh, that's fine.
as correct as possible. At least that'd be my recommendation.
Does anyone think there is anything burning or any deadlines coming up that would require us acting more quickly remotely or waiting until the next meeting? Some deadline in August, maybe?
The council has requested something from the Water Conservation Board on the amount of water availability prior to them making a decision on land use practices. Whether or not we can supply that or not, first of all, I think they ought to build the town, speaking here, we ought to build the town look like what we want to look at and then figure out how much water we need, as opposed to let the water drive it. But there is the fact that we live in a desert and there is a limited supply of water at some point in time. That being said, we were trying to get this out so that we could send something to the council, giving them some time to consider water as part of their decision on the land use code that they're proposing. And that was one of our goals. 2 weeks from now is the 24th of July, and I thought they were required to do something by August 3rd, August 12th.
Well, and they're taking action, but then they have a longer time frame.
Yeah, I can
They're gonna extend it now.
Make.
Yeah, there's no rush on that account on it, because I can tell you already, as far as the hotel moratorium is concerned, yeah, we're gonna kill the existing uses and make them legal, but we're not going to try to define what new continuing uses might be for a while, not before the moratorium extends. The Planning Commission would like to get it done by late November, I think it was.
So it got extended, so
So
it's,
we're extended at this point in time, so there is
Oh, yeah.
not a imminent need for this at this point in time.
right.
And the November date, I talked to Nora about it, she explained it some more. I'm not holding my breath, we're gonna be done by November, but we'd like to be well along the way, showing that we have a commitment to doing something, okay?
Yeah.
Because we're trying to keep the state legislature off our back, for one thing.
Yep.
So there's no big rush. So I personally think the really interesting issue for me, well, the safe yield issue and reconciling the two studies is important. But for me, the issue is if the city suddenly decides they want another 2,000 acre feet in production, for example, how might we do so? Okay, and by the way, Dana, the city is growing, the county is growing more. Dana said at the last meeting, by the way, somebody was asking her for a staff report, and she says, I don't know. I said, man, they're just people, all I do all day long is field people that come in the door wanting another water permit. I mean, it's growing out there big time. So they don't have really the resources, the extra water rights, nor the wells, as well as we do. So we're in relatively good shape. So the question of how we or the county might obtain additional water if it comes out of Mill Creek, well, then how would this actually work? I mean, to start looking into those issues. That's what I'd like to do. And that's a really interesting stuff for council, all right, because it does get into land use code and so forth at some point. Because, I mean, clearly if we're going to run out of water next year, we're not. But if we did, then we would clearly be more restrictive on certain kinds of uses than if we had in the next 50 years of water, if you will. So I think we have time to kind of consider carefully and make sure we feel confident as a group that we're getting closer.
Can I just ask for clarification that Ken sent you a response, or he sent you a new
He sent out
draft?
a whole new report.
And it's still the phase 2
It's the phase 2 report.
revision?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's basically, back, answered the questions that the board brought up, answered the questions we brought up, came up with some new ideas because he revisited all those things again,
Yeah,
and essentially rewrote parts of the report. I think what
that's great.
he thinks is a more clear manner, which would be a good thing.
You may not remember, Chuck, but another big missing item I thought in his budget on the input side was what he called direct precip from the water budget area. He was trying to calculate direct runoff. In other words, of the precip that fell in little segments scattered across this water budget area, a certain fraction of it was infiltrated and became groundwater. The rest of it ran off. He had 0 for a runoff term. I couldn't believe that. Did he fix that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he pointed that one out. That was one of the things that, that was a clear error. He acknowledges that.
Okay, good. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, man, or,
Sure, and then Eric, yep. Mhm.
yeah, and I think that's the reason why I think it's good that his report is now in what probably arguably the final report, unless someone finds something that's so bad.
Okay.
And hopefully someday we'll get the USGS report in the final version, right? We don't have it yet, it's still a draft. And I think then when we have these, and that's kind of been my position all along, this draft stuff, it's good to give us data, but we gotta be careful about using draft information. And I think that because it's not an immediate crisis, though it's good data that everybody needs, within a matter of months, we're gonna have, I think, an agreed upon number, or at least 2 numbers that we at least can defend. If we can't defend one number, we'll feel confident in. That's why I'm suggesting that we take the time to look at the numbers right, because those numbers are gonna be there for a while until someone does a nice study. And then you can do your work on figuring out how you obtain that water.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, our concern as a staff is that, the council gets a correct number so that they understand what we're actually dealing with. When Ken gave his last presentation, Emily more or less asked Chuck to write the memo, that he wrote with the numbers on it. So, and it was kind of agreed there with Cara at the meeting that the staff would do the numbers and the board would do policy more or less. But I think discussion as far as the numbers go, so that we can all agree on one or a certain range of numbers that the council can rely on would be important. And leading up to one of the meetings we had a couple of months ago, we had a meeting with Denver and Arnie and Mike and Mark and myself and Chuck. And we, I think that's the kind of the process we need to, use, come up with something that the council can say, this is it, So, like the memo here that you were going to send, we have issues with the surface water being subtracted. As far as Ken's, analysis goes, the springs and wells are fed by the losing stretches in Mill Creek. So if zero water, if there's still water that gets to the powerhouse area, which feeds Skakel Spring, as long as there's water going there, Skakel is going to have some water. But after that, if it drops to zero, our springs and wells are still getting some water. So if we subtract the whole 5,300 acre feet, I don't think that's correct understanding of what Ken was writing.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good point. And I want to add to Denver and I are talking back and forth. And I took that water budget that, Ken had 4 versions of water budget tables at the back of his report under different scenarios. And I turned that back into an Excel spreadsheet, which is what they started with. But I split it out into surface water and groundwater components. All right, because in the long run, for the most part, you can argue that both components need to be balanced. To me, that was really helpful because it's kind of like a sanity check. I mean, if I found that something was way underrepresented on outflow, then I would be looking for the other part of the water to be way overrepresented. And so anyway, I was kind of working on that spreadsheet. So I'm really looking forward. So you guys will see that later on is what I'm trying to tell you. And I think it'll be useful.
Okay, so it sounds like you're going to send to Eve this new document, the revised document. We'll have a chance to review. Does it sound good if we take that time to review? Staff has input as to what they would advise in terms of numbers based on your review, and then in our August meeting, make that determination an action item if we're then going to send the memo at that time. Is that agreeable to the board? Does anyone have any other thoughts about how to do that?
Wait, so,
I just have a question on, when you say August meeting, you mean 2 weeks or a month?
When is our August meeting?
it's the second Wednesday of August.
So it's a month away?
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll be ready to do that within a month, 2 weeks, we couldn't right now.
Okay.
Okay.
And if we want to set up a meeting like we had with Mike in Denver and Arnie before that, that would be fine as well.
I would really like to do that. I think if all of us had one number, it'd be more forceful than if we are still debating hydrologic stuff. So, and we had a good meeting last time. I think we worked out a lot of stuff. And I would just like to say, I think it's a good idea to do what Eric said. And when you guys get your numbers and we get our numbers, and have a meeting and see if we can reconcile those so that we can have a united front to the city.
Well, if you would
council.
independently set up a meeting maybe 2-3 weeks out, give a week in advance of our meeting in August, we'll go from there, unless anyone has any other thoughts.
Anyone else can come too. It's not
Sure.
just Arnie, Denver. And
Well, it can't be a quorum of the water board.
okay, whatever.
And by the way, Chuck, in my little interview with the VCAPS lady the other day, she asked me, as I'm sure she asked you, well, what are you hoping to get out of this thing? And I said, well, I'd like to refine. I was thinking specifically at that moment about Combs' report and the recharge component of the budget, which the USGS didn't really attempt, but Combs did. And to use whatever we learn in this VCAPS workshop to try to amend. I mean, I can see us, your 20% figure might be a great place to start, but maybe they can say, oh, that really ought to be 15, or maybe be 25 or whatever. Or maybe they can give you something more detailed, which feedback to Paul and Ken, and they can plug it back into their original model that integrated all those different little parcels together, So that might be helpful, Art. That way we can see where our budget is headed in the face of climate change.
I don't know, and I have to go, so I'm just wondering, is this okay if I give you one other bit of information?
Go right ahead. Yep.
Maybe it's still under Mike's staff report.
Yeah, we're still there.
Okay, just FYI, in this year's budget, we are going to do a siting and design of a new production well.
Yay.
All right.
And so the way that we're probably going to do that is we're not going to start out with where do we put it in the valley, because of what I've been told by Mark Stilson, is that if we go outside a certain distance, which is like 150 feet from an existing well, then it becomes protestable, if that's the right word. And not that we worry about the protest because we're a municipal provider and all that, but still, we have several wells that aren't functioning right now, is what I'm reporting to you. And so we think that we'll look at the couple of the wells that we have that aren't functioning and do an analysis, and if it looks like that's a good location, we'll put the new well within that 150 feet of one of those old wells. That's the reason they're not functioning is either casing collapsed or the pumps are decrepit, or we just haven't used them for years and years. Rather than we're trying to rehabilitate those pumps, we're actually siting it. We'll design it this year with funding from this year, with the idea that hopefully if we can get a good CIP going through city council in the next couple of years, we can actually have the money to build and get it online, so we would have a higher level of redundancy within our system, if nothing else.
So depth of the well doesn't matter as long as it's 150 feet?
Yeah, interesting, huh? But that's correct. That's what, and I've asked them that a couple of times. So I will keep, Eric or I will keep you advised on that, just because we think you'd be
So
interested.
if you're within 150 feet, you don't have to file a new change in point of diversion with the DWRI.
Exactly, which is protestable.
Oh, God, yeah. You can imagine what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Everybody
But
everybody
our system-
protests everything.
We're actually looking at the whole system now, just trying to beef up the reliability of the system.
Artie?
We were close in terms of the last couple of years, been that it was at Hanson Allen Lewis report to, at peak production and in peak use, not having enough water, so to maintain pressure for fire suppression. And the discussion was that it was a storage issue, not necessarily a production issue, to make that number. And I remember the city has purchased a piece of property on the corner up there of Spanish Valley Road. Does the city have any plans at this point in time to increase their storage potential and get that on the ground, or what?
Within 2 weeks, I'll be submitting the application for a grant funding to Drinking Water Board for a 1 million gallon tank at that location.
That location, so that's still on the table.
I thought it was
Is it 3 million?
I thought it was 3.
3 million.
3
Oh,
million.
yes, where it's been is for the last year and a half, we've had a consultant doing the application. Finally got it done. And so we're gonna submit it, we talked to Joel about, we're gonna submit it. Hopefully we can get the money. Because that was actually the impetus. Apparently, before my time, the city went in to get a loan, a grant/loan for the tank. And the Drinking Water Board said, well, you need a culinary water master plan. So they funded the culinary water master plan, which was great, which we now have, which sets the stage and identifies that as our #1 need. Because that's what they said, how do you know you need a tank? Which made sense, good question, right? And it came out as the #1 need. The #2 need was the Mill Creek water line replacement the council approved last night.
Oh,
So
yeah, that was,
that was the #2 need. And then I think #3 or 4 is the replacement well.
Okay.
So we're moving along. So yeah, the answer is we have that application almost ready, just need to be updated to change the names and a little bit on some of those things.
Okay.
I've been approved for it.
Thank you.
So before you go, Chuck, I just thought maybe you could update the council on whether Ken is going to do a similar analysis for the Spanish Valley aquifer, so that we can compare the USGS report with his work and get a more complete. That was talked about being funded, or?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, the answer is, so we're contracting with Ken to do HESA analysis on the Pat Creek watershed.
all right.
So that would give us, because I know you probably knows, but just to make sure we're clear, Ken just dealt with the Glen Canyon aquifer because that's where the city gets all its water from. And there's always kind of this mystery out there, what's on the rest of the valley. And so now we're going to engage him to do an analysis on the rest of the valley because the USGS did the entire valley, right? So, and we're putting a deadline on it of 6 months. So that'll be my challenge.
Well, he could really take advantage of all the monitoring wells that the USGS put in. Because that, that was fundamental to the report is the hydraulic gradient. Remember those maps they drew of the gradients? They know that because they put in all the wells in the last few years. And I know they just put them in the last few years because when I went to do the historical report that I wanted to go back decades, I found out of 20 some odd USGS wells, one hand maybe had a lot of historical data, and there was like 15 new ones that had only been there for a few years. And I'm pretty sure, I'm guessing they must have put them in for this study or something. But that's good. That's
Yeah,
nice.
and he'll, he likes to rely upon other data,
Yeah.
especially verifiable data and published data, which I think is good. So he'll rely on that.
Yeah.
So yes, Eric.
So he's figuring he'll go through and do more transmissivity measurements,
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because there's a whole bunch of springs on that west side that
Have very poor water quality.
and I don't, you're the water quality expert, I am not, but when you say very poor, is it very poor like undrinkable or very poor where you'd notice it compared to this fine Glen Canyon aquifer we have?
Both.
Or unhealthy or,
Both. Mostly because of the formation that they're coming out of. Some of them are way down here they're right next to the Paradox Formation, so they're salty. And you know what? The people that have water rights to those, almost all of those water rights are taken in part of this adjudication. I've seen a lot of them go through that little process. They're not using them for drinking.
Are they adequate for agriculture?
They're adequate for their ponds. Okay, whether or not they're adequate to grow alfalfa is one thing. Whether or not they're adequate to grow fruit trees is another. They probably could be used for alfalfa. Each one of them's a little different. But in general, the water quality on that side of the valley is similar to the same situation that Castle Valley has, where the Paradox Formation is coming out. Basically, the water's hitting that at this point in time and coming out of that formation, and that formation is not known for having high-quality water.
Well, then, I think it'll be interesting to compare quantity and quality issues for that, because USGS kind of lumps it all together.
They do.
So I think that'd be a good thing for us as we look.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Make long-term decisions.
Super.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And we can all.
Thank you for the
we all-
updates.
We all should pray and contact your state legislators not to undo the whole thing with the revisions in the tax code. That's a big subject on the city's radar right now. We've been sitting relatively pretty for a while, but could be a mess if they dramatically reduce the reliance on
They're having
sales.
some tax meetings at the end of the month.
Yeah, there is a,
One more.
July 20th
thank you,
July
yeah.
at the Grand Center, I think at 1 o'clock, and so.
And we want citizen participation. I mean, Rachel obviously and those folks would be great, but the more the merrier, so.
We won't hold you up anymore, but thanks again.
Thank you, Chuck.
Hey, could I
Yeah.
introduce
Sure.
Oscar Antion? He's our new Public Works Director. And this
How do you do, Oscar?
Oscar, come up close.
Again?
Come.
I'm coming from California.
Sit down, talk to us.
Thank you. Retired from the Navy, did 20 years as a civil engineer, in the Civil Engineer Corps, the Civis. Managed public works organization in the Navy for the Navy and Marine Corps bases. Retired Monterey was my last duty station. Actually, it was in Africa, but here in Conus was in Monterey. My last job in Africa was building basically the base in Djibouti, where I wish I had the water that we have here. It's pretty salty. We have a couple of, we have 7 wells for 1 little base, and we have to put it through reverse osmosis, a lot of treatment.
I remember going with my daughter, youngest girl, when she sent to Peace Corps in West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire. And we went over there and visited her, and her job was, there's open sewers running through, little small towns. They just step over it and make sure you don't.
Yeah, it's very different. Even our trash, we started taking our the trash from the galley. Basically lots of cans of food, waste food, to the dump, and the truck never made it to the dump with a full bucket. Basically, people will jump into the truck and start taking that stuff out. Interesting. So that's kind of, over the last couple of years, I've been retired for a couple of years. Over the last couple of years, I've been working for a city in California, for NASA for almost a year. I'm managing a construction project for releasing some land for Google, Mountain View, and I got lucky. I went to Utah, so I set this position and was likely to.
Oscar, if you don't mind a personal question, why did you move here?
I went to school, basically my home away from home, I want to say. I'm from Mexico, and when I came from Mexico, I came to Utah. My first place that I lived in the U.S. was Salt Lake City. And when I lived in Salt Lake City, this was the place where I usually used to go and visit. And so I fell in love with the area. I love the parks. I spent a lot of time in the river, in Lake Powell. I'm an outdoor kind of person. So I love this area. And this was a great way to get back.
So from what part of Mexico? I asked because I have a son-in-law from Oaxaca.
Yeah, I'm from Chihuahua.
Oh, Chihuahua, wait, yeah.
It's probably why my brothers and I love this area so much, because it's a lot of it's high desert. We get extreme temperatures, in the summer and winter. They're kind of, so that's where I am. Sierra Madre, the Sierra Madre in Chihuahua, close to the, I don't know if you heard of the Copper Canyon.
Yes.
So we're very close to that. Yeah.
Did you run the marathons while you were there? No?
In Mexico, no. I ran a few marathons in Spain and Guam and the Big Sur, and so yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. Nice meeting you guys.
Do you have any other
Nice to
questions?
meet you.
Hold on, do you have any other questions for him?
You have any questions? Yeah. Sure. You have any more questions?
You have a lot of old infrastructure in this
Oh,
town.
yes. I'm learning quickly the conditions of our sewers, our water lines, and all of those things. Yes. Most cities now, they have those challenges. And even the federal government, working for the federal government, we manage facilities that are, World War II, or World War I in some cases.
Wow.
So we have that kind of challenge to replace and plan for.
Is that one of your goals, to look at a long-term plan for replacing
Yes.
infrastructure that's necessary?
Yes, we do. So, and that's something that I'm going to be looking with here with the city of Moab, and looking ahead how we can get those things upgraded.
Upgraded as we go along.
Yeah.
Yeah, engineering and public works started the whole infrastructure or asset management back in 2014. So,
There's a special meeting about it on September 9th at noon. That's a 2.5-hour meeting about public works infrastructure.
You're
Council.
gonna take my entire time going to meetings if I attend every single one of these
You
meetings.
don't have to go, but somebody's going.
You'll
Mike.
send it out, or somebody will send it out. When are you?
It's a city council meeting,
Oh,
so,
city council meeting.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so you heard us ask him about the storage issue.
Storage.
The storage issue with water and how the Hanson Allen Lewis report, and the 3 or 4 things that were the priorities in terms of water delivery.
Yes, I understand, broadly. I haven't looked at all of the figures, like, where our quantity is going out. That's something that I think engineering worked out, but I know at least that Chuck mentioned to me of a new water tank that we probably plan for. I haven't seen the actual models, of what's driving the decision, and how to justify, but I'm sure I'll learn.
Any other,
Quiero ayudar Yemor. Te Yemor.
Maybe we can invite you back at the first of the year.
Sure. Yes.
Don't be a stranger.
No, I won't. I think water is such an issue for everybody, so I have interest in that.
Yeah, Levi's our guy. He gives us a lot of information.
Yes.
you guys are very, we have a lot of respect for Levi and this board in terms of when I'm working with him on several other type of things too. Levi's always been very cooperative, very helpful, very knowledgeable, and very capable.
Yes, that's been my experience with him so far. Thank you. We're very lucky to have him, I think. Yes. Also, I think Levi also was a Navy guy too.
I-
Oh, so maybe that's why. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I think we're done with Mike's board report now, so just kidding. Let's move on to other business, and our discussion is focused on the water fact sheet. Was there something particular we wanted to discuss, or if we had any feedback, comments, critiques at this point? Otherwise, we'd been reviewing it by email the past several weeks. Does anybody have anything to say about it at the moment?
Water fact sheet, Chuck said that he thought he had a problem with that, but then he corrected himself, and the numbers that he was concerned with were on the memorandum.
The memo.
Yes.
But that could translate, I suppose? Didn't we pull from the memo from the water fact sheet, in other
No,
words, or no?
the discussion, the numbers that he came, were
For surface waters.
surface
Oh, okay,
waters from
yep.
Ken Combs' report then, and there's
Gotcha.
none of those numbers are in this
Reflected.
water fact sheet.
Okay,
Okay, no, I mean, maybe you didn't hear when Chuck and I were speaking, Arnie, but we do have some problems with some of the numbers. I think, Chuck, the little we did talk about this, I think the build-out number was extremely high. And so we would like to review it and have a discussion before, before anything final is done. I understand this has been reviewed a number of times and, revised, so, but I assume we're working towards a final or more or less, something more conclusive. So before, this is like stamped or whatever we would do.
Well, it's an update. This is an update. This is the
Yeah.
update of June 2019. We can update it at any time. It's a living document.
Okay.
Okay, so which numbers are you concerned with in particular?
Well, I think we looked at the projected population growth according to the Hansen Allen Luce analysis, and it seems like the build-out just is really high. I mean,
That's fine. So what number were you suggesting, and what document would you suggest we pull that number from?
well, I would not have an answer for that right now, but I do feel like engineering would like to look at,
Did
that
Hansen
number
Allen,
and probably some of the others before.
did Hansen Allen Luce give you a number for 2060? Because we have a number for 2060 from Grissa and a number for 2060 for San Juan Valley.
Right, and that was more along the lines of the 5,400, I think, as opposed to the 9,400.
Yeah, we just took this from your document.
I
It's the city's document, so I'm not defending that number as build out. That was the only number we had to use. So we'll be happy to take another number if you can give us one that's
Okay,
documented.
well, like I said, we're gonna look at it. That's all. I'm just saying, we don't have anything conclusive yet, because Mark and Chuck and I haven't really discussed anything.
Eric, can we roll that into what we're talking about with the memo more generally for next month, for August meeting? For you to bring any particular recommended
Yeah,
numbers?
I think we could look at this before then, and
I'm kind of curious as to which numbers he's got problems with, so we can at least get started on it. What are the?
Sure, if there's anything else, yeah.
no, I don't have any specifics. I don't have really specific about that either, so, I'm just talking about what we had, said, that's all.
So what, right now, the only number I see that the problem is the city had built out, and if we can find a better number to use, I've got no problems with it.
Sounds good.
Sure.
So that's the only issue at this point in time you've got with the water fact sheet. Somebody asked me today where we got the number for the hotel room estimates of annual use.
Those were from the water billing.
From the billing. So somebody did an analysis on that to see how many rooms we had, and
Yeah.
about how much they used, and then divided the two together, or divided one by the other, and came up with about how much they use in Moab, Utah.
Right, and it was from 2017. So I have all those spreadsheets. I have the raw data.
Yeah, I just don't necessarily need them.
But I was thinking about updating it. I was going to ask Chantel, since the last time we did it, we didn't have the end of the year, you always lag a little behind for the data. So I was going to try to update it with 2018 and see if.
So are you referring to the percentage of usage?
No, I was looking at this 0.36 acre feet. I know where we got the 0.25 and the 0.45 and the 1.0 acre feet, and that came from Division of Water Rights, because that's what they will grant for that.
Yeah,
and then-
that number is a lot different than the number that we used previously, right? We were using 0.8 acre feet for each hotel room in town. And it went down to 0.36 acre feet. And that was just in this last go-round that we changed it. And it seemed like the number came from someplace I don't remember.
The 0.36 came
From this-
from an actually analysis of the number of hotel rooms we have, not the number of connections, but the number of hotel rooms we have based, and then lumped all the hotels' water use together and divided one by the other. And that's where they came up with the 0.36 acre feet, and that's what she just said.
Right, and it's older data, and it takes a while, because Chantel literally has to look at every single account to see if it's a hotel,
Right.
right?
Yeah, that's,
So we just didn't get to it. I didn't actually request that of her, but maybe you were gonna do it. But Chantel just there was too much going on to request that kind of
Right.
burden. She has new staff and stuff.
So it's a fine number, I was just wondering where it came from. And it seems reasonable to me. What?
They're all fine numbers.
They're all fine.
It does emphasize the point that a lot of these numbers are going to need to be revisited maybe every 6 months, if not every year or year and a half, given the change of number of hotels. And
so we can see trends, I think it's.
we should always be looking at, just like you said before, Arnie, this is the latest update. And when we do forward this to the city, we should just make clear, I think, that that's the case, that this is a constantly changing process and numbers, and we're just showing the trend over time, like Rosemary said.
Arnie, are you saying that it was 0.8 acre
No,
feet per room, and now it's
I
0.36?
wasn't saying that.
That was a number to estimate what percentage a motel room was of the sewage usage and all of that.
All of that.
It was a national number, I believe.
Yeah, so sorry, Arnie, the data that I had was from that overall Moab usage, so that, my data was that bottom part. I didn't come up with those acre feet.
With 0.36 acre feet?
Yeah.
Who came up with
I think that was the number that the state uses.
Is that the number that the state uses?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Let's look into it.
I would like
So
to-
if you
I'd like
added
to-
up all the water that the hotels in Moab used and divided it by the number of rooms, what would you get?
Well, that's the.
That is the question.
They used a
That's what-
0.80 as a reference point for an ERU.
Right, exactly. That's where that number came from.
That's where number
where it
0.8
comes
came
from.
from. We didn't, okay, so.
But I think it's significant, and why would it be so different? That the ERU is 0.8, right?
And-
For every single hotel room, it's 0.8 of an ERU.
Equivalent residential unit, yes.
Yeah,
ERC.
And where does that number come from? That's a national number, a general?
well, that was the number that.
I remember this number, but I'm forgetting where it comes from.
Hanson, Ellen, and Luce, whoever was the contractor on the sewer plant. Like,
Ah.
that was a number that they were using.
Yep,
And,
okay.
yeah, Kyle was on the council at that time.
It's hard to know if it's like a conservative estimate.
Right.
Or whether it's meant to be accurate. As
Well, I'd like to go
because
back.
engineers often design with a safety factor
So-
of some
Yeah, and that's what I was saying to Eve, is what I wanted to talk to Chantel about, is pulling a bill and seeing if that state number is actually accurate.
Or reasonable.
us.
For us, yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I think it's a really good question.
So does anybody have any, well, your billing would help sort all this out, but that 0.36 acre feet number, I'm wondering, I mean, I can imagine all kinds of ways it could be misleading, depending on how they normalize it. It could be normalized per room that's built, but if the room is only occupied 50% of the time,
Still 0.36, that's what they're going at per year. So whether or not it's occupied all the time, you're quite correct. And I guess how Hanson and Allen would put that together would be whether or not, do you think it would be a national average, and that somebody would have actually done this? They don't usually.
That's the number that they use.
That's the number that they used was 0.8, and what,
0.8 ERU, yeah.
That's kind of a gross, sort of engineering overview type of thing that you do. But what Rosemary's talking about is actual usage, which is much more reliable and
Well,
something that much more dependent.
The overall Moab use, did you compile that then?
Yeah, so
Well,
that
so
overall Moab use is based on our bills.
Residential 50%, and that's 1 acre feet,
and like the accommodation was 16%. Well,
double that, 32. That, I mean,
Yeah,
it's close.
Yeah, anyways, we need to, if this number did come from, we had an asterisk up here at one point in time that the estimates of annual use came from the Division of Water Rights. We took it out because we felt like we had too many footnotes on the gosh darn thing.
Now you want more.
Yeah.
No, I don't necessarily want more. I didn't actually complain there were too many footnotes. But if the hotel room did come from water rights, maybe I'll send Mark, I'll tell you what. I will send Mark Stilson an email and ask him what sort of numbers do they use for estimated annual use for a hotel room in the state of Utah?
And it'd be nice to check it against one or two. I mean, I could check it against, you know,
And it would be nice for us to see whether or not that state average is
close to ours.
close to what we seem to be obtaining. And then it would also nice to be note if, I don't have the Hanson Allen Lewis report on the wastewater. Eric, would you mind?
Online.
Is it online?
I think so.
Yeah,
Can-
anything that's approved should be online.
Well, you know what'd be good, Arnie, too, to ask them is these other categories have, you know, with landscaping, without landscaping, and so it'd be a good way to shame the hotels if it's, no, I'm just kidding.
Acre-size swimming pools, that kind of landscaping, waterfalls.
You know, no, all kidding aside, like outside use, I mean, are they just looking at the sink and the shower? Are they looking at how a hotel
entire hotel.
landscapes?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, the big
Right.
difference is that
Laundry,
tourists don't
right.
water their
Laundry's
lawns.
huge.
Right.
They have to
Laundry's
count
probably the
laundry.
biggest out there.
And that may be where we go from
Oh, yeah,
0.36 to
car washing,
0.8.
lawns,
But either way,
big
we
water.
need to do a little research on that number just so, because we know we're gonna get hit from the constituents of the Moab City about hotel rooms
Yeah.
using all our water. So we should probably nail that number down if we need to.
So Arnie, you're going to check with Stilson about where these numbers come from? and
Where
how-
those numbers come from,
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily going to go, I was gonna check with Stilson if it's a water rights issue, because I have a
Okay.
relationship with him.
Mhm.
Okay. The other numbers, whether or not the city wants to generate them, and whether they came from Henson Allen Lewis, I was kind of hoping the city would look up what Henson Allen Lewis and the rest of them were suggesting a hotel room was.
I'll find that sewer study for you.
Will you find the sewer study?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got another thought. I want to run this by you guys. So consider a family of four. They live here in town, and they use a certain amount of water. And let's say they don't do any landscaping at their house, that all their water is culinary water, then you're down closer to this 0.45 acre feet per year water, whatever that number is. Now compare that residential family to a visitor family. They've come down from someplace outside Moab, they're here to visit, they stay in a hotel, they eat at restaurants and so forth. But I would make the assertion right off the top of my head that, as a order of magnitude anyway, that visitor family is going to use about the same amount of culinary water that a residential family would, because they do the same things. They shower, they eat, they wash their clothes, maybe they eat, they eat food.
They might fill up their tank at Lions Park of our culinary water.
They what?
Oh,
They might fill up their big water tank at Lions Park of our nice treated
But
water.
you have a good point, that they're a family of four, and families of four eat, drink, sleep, and all those other things, and they would essentially use about the same amount of water as a residential family.
so if you bought that assumption for the moment, then one easy way to compute the burden that hotels and overnight accommodations have would be just to try to get a handle on how many visitors are in town any one particular day, and you could integrate through all that and get an additional water demand and normalize all that out. I mean, that'd be another way of looking at it without having to go through.
It might be complicated a bit by how many hotel rooms they're taking as a family of four.
Oh, yeah, you'd have to know that. You have to know the
Right.
vacancy rates, absolutely. But maybe you can.
Sure. So,
I think a motel is going to use more water for laundry than the average home. Probably significantly more, because
You're gonna wash the sheets more often.
every night they're washing the sheets, pretty much, new towels,
That's true.
whereas
They do
a
a lot of
house is
laundry.
only going to use it every week or 4 days.
Or if you're me, every 2 months.
So Rosemary, how
Or
wide?
if they're using their little, don't do my laundry, then, that's the kind of hotels that we really want to showcase. That's why I'm interested in looking at some hotels.
So you'll run numbers on maybe a couple,
Yeah.
maybe some with and some without that policy?
Yeah.
Okay.
We started putting those in the rooms yet?
Oh, absolutely. We're just ordering another 500. They were so nice that people kept stealing them because they have a really nice picture of Moab on it. And so,
So, Arnie, Mike's condition was that there was a family of four, so there was probably a woman in the house who didn't let the towels go for.
nasty.
Yeah, maybe we'll, So that raises a couple of interesting questions. So how many, across the industry, across the country, how many hotels have gone to this, the little notes that you check into your hotel room, maybe you're gonna be there one night, maybe more, and there's a little note that says, if you don't want us to wash all the towels, leave them on the floor. No, don't leave them on the floor, something like that. Some way to distinguish whether you want them to wash it or not, and change the sheets, that kind of thing.
That's what we're talking about.
That's what, well, yeah, but how widespread is that? And do you, when you guys are traveling, do you take advantage? I mean, are you conscientious and say, hey, don't bother to change the sheets, I'm gonna be here for.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I lock my door as best I can.
Every hotel, Mike, that I've visited have asked for them.
Is that right?
Like, there's nobody that says, no, we don't want them.
Oh, yeah.
Saves them a lot of money.
And so now, yeah, like, I just did a new batch for Moab Spring Ranch.
Yeah,
Great.
that's good.
That's why it's widely accepted, saves the motel a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, they're all for it. I've read in other,
And plus, they're trying to get publicity. So now we're like saying, oh, you come to
Oh, they gotta
Moab,
go,
here's the hotels that are conserving water, here's the hotels that are our dark sky compliant hotels, here's our, soon-to-be recycling hotels. That's the next list of. So they're getting good
Most
PR
people just
too.
look at the price of the room, they don't.
Right. I know, it's hard to get a room in this
I'll stand planted.
town.
Where I live, I mean, water is such a precious commodity. Monterey Bay, there's a shortage. Restaurants don't serve you water anymore unless you ask for it. So I don't know if that's the same here.
Wow.
We're moving in that direction.
Well, it's a little different, well, it's pretty hot here. Everybody asks for water.
I know.
Well, Oscar, 2 or 3 years ago, when California went through a severe drought out there, and then they got some heavy rain since, they figure they've recharged their aquifers in just a year or two, or are still the aquifers considered to be badly depleted?
I'm sure they're badly.
Some of the lakes are charged. Lakes and reservoirs are at capacity. I don't think the aquifers can be charged because, the aquifer doesn't get recharged at the same rate as the lake. It takes years.
Yeah.
Major subsidence in the San Joaquin Valley is, from lower, mining the aquifer. Rebecca Anders used to work in Fresno, and that's what she said was the case out there. They just mine the aquifer constantly.
So they have not substantially recharged since the drought then?
So we did do some reviews on this. I don't have any other questions on this water fact sheet. Does anybody else have any questions or any suggestions on it?
I have an action item. I am going to go through this 2016 report from the county and throw in my own suggestions for updated. And we can chew on those if you want. But that's-
And I just wanted to make a note that council members have asked me about the memo in particular. Like Ronnie wants to know if it's like good to go, if it's information she can share with people.
The water fact sheet is an updated sheet that is on the website and available to the public and anybody at this point in time.
Yeah, that's what I told her.
That's what you told her?
And then she also specifically asked about the memo.
Okay, which we decided we were going to put on hold until the August meeting,
So I'll get back to her on that and let her know
that we're still discussing the numbers with Ken Coleman, the city engineer.
but just to be clear, this was sent to everybody.
This was already sent. Yes, I realized that in our meeting, we discussed that we were going to send it, we were going to approve it over email, and we did that. There is a technical error there, that 5,317 apparently didn't get knocked down by 20%.
Do you think that should be communicated in any other way to the city council at this time?
Apparently, we're going to be sending another memo to them, whatever you want to call it.
So
in
this memo
August.
was already sent.
This memo was already sent.
Okay, so,
We're
Yeah.
fine.
so it's out there.
And we're going to send another one in August.
And they don't need to know that yet.
Now,
I'll let
Yeah,
Ronnie
when
know
they get
just
it.
because she was asking.
we will be sending
Sure.
another one after some discussions with the city engineers and KenCom.
It's subject to update at any given time.
It's subject to update at any given time, but the memo, we were specific, this memo was about KenCom's report. And that one, we're still working out. The fact sheet is what it is.
Okay. If there's no other discussion on the water fact sheet, then we'll move on to the Phase 2 report and memo to council, which we've already started a discussion of to some degree. I don't know if we need to talk about the memo anymore at this point. We've done that. Is there anything else about the report we wanted to discuss? Otherwise, it sounds like we're going to be getting a revised version of the report in a couple of hours.
I want to,
Sure.
I don't have KenCom's responses to us at this point in time.
I hope they're highlighted in the new report.
I was talking about the Phase 1 and Phase 2 reports. I'm still concerned with my biggest issue with the report. And the way I understood his response to us was that the water in the surface water, the Mill Creek water that was coming, is a mix of the high altitude water and the lower altitude water, which is absolutely true for Mill Creek surface water. It's not true for the Glen Canyon aquifer. The point was that the isotopes that we found meant that all the water there came from a higher elevation than 7,000 or 8,000 feet that's in in our Glen Canyon aquifer. And when I read his response back, it was like, to me, what I read was the water that's in Mill Creek is a mix of the high altitude water. I still have serious issues. Well, I shouldn't necessarily use the word serious. I still do not agree that the Glen Canyon aquifer and the Mill Creek stream are as tightly connected as KenCom's report indicates.
So when you say Glen Canyon aquifer, you mean what he's calling the rock matrix part?
Our springs, the water that's coming out of our springs.
Oh, okay, because he's claiming that comes from a losing stretch in Mill Creek, which would be surface water.
Which would be surface water, and I'm telling you, I disagree with that based on the data that's the isotope data that was presented from the USGS reports. Okay.
And this is something that would not be addressed in these latest revisions because it's part of Phase 1, correct?
It was part, the comments were on Phase 1, and I don't have his response to me, but his response basically said the water in Mill Creek is a mix of that high altitude water, and that is true. But my question to him was that the water that's in the Glen Canyon aquifer is not a mix of Mill Creek water. The Glen Canyon aquifer is, if you look at the isotope data, I've already said it 3 times, it appears that all that water in the Glen Canyon aquifer is coming from above 7, 8, or 8,000 feet, actually, essentially 8,000 feet. And he's using his water budget as everything on sand flats also. And I've had these discussions before, but I still have serious problems with that. He hasn't convinced me that the Glen Canyon aquifer, the losing stretch of Mill Creek, is responsible for recharging our Glen Canyon aquifer and our springs. That the data that the USGS presented just doesn't support that, and I guess I need to address it again. But we're talking about the HESA report and the 2 report. So I'm just making that statement, and I'm going to need to, at some point in time, make that comment again. I'm not sure when that's going to be.
So as far as I remember, he's claiming no groundwater is getting from the higher elevations past that Morrison formation or
Yes.
something, and that all the water in the rock matrix part of the Glen Canyon aquifer comes from local rainfall. That would be the logical conclusion, right?
That's correct.
So you're saying that some of that water is getting into the springs and wells then, and he's not accounting for it. Is that right?
That is essentially correct. He's saying that that all the water's coming up out of the Dakota at the top. I believe it's the Dakota Formation, at the barrier up there where what we used to call the Moab tongue member, the Entrada, which is not what they call it anymore. It's coming back to the surface, then coming down Mill Creek, and then it's losing, and then those losing streams of Mill Creek. And there's just not, if you actually add up the amount, I'm also thinking outside the box here, is that if you actually add up the amount of water loss according to the report where the guy did the losing sections, and it's only losing by half a acre-feet, a half a CFS here and there on that stream. And that's just an account for the 11 or the 2 or 3,000 or 2,000 acre-feet that we're getting out of the springs at this point in time. I've also stated here before, prior, that with discussions with the people who wrote the USGS report and Kip Sullivan, that at some point in time in the next 6 months, they're going to be putting out a document telling us how much water is actually in the Glen Canyon aquifer based on the fact that it could only come from these drainages, okay, and there's only so much water that falls above 9,000 feet. So this is your recharge for your Glen Canyon aquifer, which is a completely different hypothesis than Ken Combs' report. Okay, so we're talking another pipe, so to speak. That Glen Canyon aquifer, the springs that we have a special pipe, so to speak. It's not necessarily the
Fracture zone, he called it.
Special fracture zone.
Yeah.
But it's higher up. Yes, all the water's coming is from higher up. And we can't see under the ground, okay? We can't really tell what's going on underneath there. We can tell that there was fractures here and there.
What were the isotopes on Mill Creek?
The isotopes that we're talking about are the deuterium and the hydrogen isotope, deuterium and the oxygen isotope. The heavier waterfalls, this is not globally, you can't take this and put it globally, but you can compare locally. And so there's a well up there where obviously at 8,000 feet, it had this concentrations of deuterium and oxygen 18, okay? And then everything below that had heavier concentrations because this fell at a lower elevation, and everything above it has lighter concentrations of the heavier elements, if I can make that statement. Did that make sense to you, what I just said? No? So the heavier water falls at lower elevations because it's heavier. It doesn't get as high up in the air. And what they found in one of the wells up high was a certain concentration of those lighter isotopes. Okay, and then as you move downstream farther and you get heavier elements, obviously that water fell at lower elevations. But the water that's coming out of our springs has isotope concentrations that indicate that it fell above 8,000 feet. All of it.
Is that a scientific fact? Or
That's
is that
a scientific fact that they're going to publish a paper on. And that's one of my biggest problems with the kids.
Just the springs.
Just the springs.
Not the pumping of the wells.
Not the pumping of the well. They sampled some wells. They didn't sample all of them. You'd have to sample each one to decide where you.
The city wells.
City wells. The city wells are located right next to those springs.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that they would be in the same aquifer. I'm assuming they would be in the same aquifer, but I did not look at that data precisely. However, they have said to me that the water coming out of those springs is falling above 8,000 feet.
I asked Ken about that, actually, when Kyle took us on the 2-hour thing.
Yeah.
And I asked him because I didn't understand all of the oxygen 18, oxygen 16. I got confused about it, but I did understand a really simple part, which is there's something called a hydrofluorocarbon that is in Freon and refrigerators and hairspray and so forth, and it didn't exist until 60 years ago. And, well, in nature, maybe like itty-bitty amounts. But there's part of the USGS report where they're talking about, and they say specifically, there's not one molecule of hydrofluorocarbons in the Glen Canyon aquifer, which means all that water's 60 years old. Now, they contradict themselves inside the USGS report. And I asked Ken about that, and he explained the tritium situation, which I didn't get. But this is why I want to have this meeting with Eric and everybody. I mean, there's some reasonably disjointed statements that come out of these two reports, and there's some reasonable problems inside the reports. So I don't get what you're talking about yet. I can go home and Google it all and come back smarter. But the one I do understand is the refrigerators is cut and dried, and they just make that statement, bam, right there. There is no water younger than 60 years in the Glen Canyon
And
aquifer.
if it's coming from.
Maybe it was all there and it's gone. Is that a possibility?
I don't know. See, that's why I need to talk to you smart people and see, really, I'm being serious about all of the possible ways that you could, it's like cubic feet per second to acre feet, and do you really trust those flow meters, and what does it all mean? I mean, I wish we could have some technical talks in here where we could kind of, you guys could educate us on the little questions that come up.
Okay, so I'm learning as well as you are. I've been on water quantity for quite some time, and sure, I can do some things better than others. I'm learning about the whole isotope situation as we go along here. So I'm not that far ahead of you in Denver. And I mean, I knew nothing about it until I started reading the USGS report, and I went to the Geological Society of America's conference 2 years ago. How much data, how much information you can find from isotopes that you could not find from water chemistry. So I'm not that far ahead of you. And all I can really say is, like I've just stated here, is that the heavier elements, the heavier isotopes of oxygen and hydrogen fall out at lower elevations. And that was one of the reasons, and with that well up there, because it's a local issue, it's not global, it would be a different ratio depending upon where you were in the world, okay? But because there's that well up there, okay, and obviously all the water in that well fell at least above that mark, and it has a certain ratio of lighter isotopes in it. And the Glen Canyon, the stuff that's coming out of the springs, has that same ratio or lighter, okay?
Yeah.
Means that all the water that's coming out of our springs had to have fallen above the elevation of that well.
And that's above the Dakota boundary.
And that's above the Dakota boundary.
So what assertion of Ken's are you disputing? I'm trying
That Mill Creek, all the water that it's not coming, he's stated that we're
It's
getting.
only a half an acre foot loss.
So I thought that not the Sun Song report, what's the guy's name that did the flow measurements? That needs to be repeated, by gosh, it needs to be
Blanchard.
repeated. Blanchard's report, he didn't, that was the second part of my conversation. He measured the losses, gains and losses in Mill Creek in November, expecting that gains and losses in Mill Creek would be tied to groundwater recharge or losses to the stream, losses from the stream, or recharge from groundwater. And he found that it did go up and down depending upon where you were. At some places it was a losing stream, some places it was a gaining stream.
Yeah.
Mostly it was losing, okay? But the amounts of water that were actually being lost, that was the second part of my point. The amounts of water that actually are being lost are not enough to supply the amount of water we're getting out of the springs.
I don't remember the number, but I got sort of hung up on that thing that Blanchard did, which I thought was marvelous. On October, I guess, of '85 and March of '86, in order to make sure there's no snow melt, that everything he's talking about is the interaction between Mill Creek and the aquifer.
Right.
They went to 22 places along Mill Creek, and I'm assuming it's the same crew with the same instrument using the same techniques, and there still was some reasonable variation. But I'm going to round these numbers way off. There's 9,000 acre feet of water, and he got acre feet from cubic feet just by multiplying everything times whatever, 7,800, whatever that number is.
750, whatever it is.
Okay. And what he shows is that there are 9,000 acre feet right before you go to the Sheely Tunnel. That's how much is coming down out of the mountains. Then you go past the Shealy Tunnel, all right? And the Shealy Tunnel takes 3,000, let's say 4,000 acre feet out, okay?
Did he say that at the time of the measurements?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I just want to make sure you're not getting confused, I talked about this, confused with a typical 3,000 acre foot withdrawal through Shealy in the years to come, all right? Because that's what we've been doing in recent years, in recent decades, but I'm not sure about
No.
back in 1990 when Blanchard did his studies.
I got it here, but I'll go over, see, this is what we need to talk about, this kind of stuff. He says that his measurements that he multiplied by a K to, from cubic feet per second to get acre feet was 9,000 acre feet before the Shealy Tunnel and 3,000 acre feet after the Shealy Tunnel. So if we take 3,000 acre feet out, there should be 9,000 minus 3,000, there should be 6,000 acre feet. But it went 9,000, Shealy Tunnel, 3,000 acre feet. Okay, so in that 0.2 of a mile stretch, there's a loss of enough water to do Moab for a year, okay? And he says in there, I don't know what happened here, words to that effect. But then to do Arnie's point, once you get to MC8 on the other side of the Shealy Tunnel, and it's the 2,678 whatever, it kind of goes like this, all the way down to the MC22, which is the last thing he measures. And he says, don't remember the number, but it's less than 1,000 feet loss, acre feet per year. Less, it's something like 760 acre feet a year don't show up, at the end of the creek, which means they went into the aquifer.
It went into the, yeah.
So that's a question I need to ask you technical.
Well, you can
guys.
explain both these things by saying that the big loss from the creek occurs farther up the hill and flows as groundwater down into the golf course area, which explains why you see so much more losing water up higher that you just described. And would also explain why we can't explain how much water comes out of the springs just from the loss in the golf course area itself.
Because I had exactly Arnie's question, is 760 acre feet a year? That's not enough to recharge the aquifer. We're pulling 2,000 acre
Well,
feet.
yeah, but that's a
out.
loss from surface water there. I mean, suppose that the waters are, here comes the creek down the hill, blah, 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 blah. And the common model is that down here, suddenly the bottom drops out. It's badly fractured.
Yeah.
Mill Creek loses big time. Boom, we got our 2,000 acre feet of water through the springs and wells and so forth. And you're saying that Blanchard's measurements don't support that. And meanwhile, you're saying that Blanchard's own measurements show a much larger loss up higher on the hill, so to speak, up the river's course. So my question is, would the 2,000 acre feet be coming down into badly fractured sandstone as groundwater all the way to the golf course?
Is this the special fracture zone, the pipe that you mentioned before, does Ken Colm acknowledge this in the report?
That's his hypothesis.
Right.
Basically, is that the water is traveling in these fracture zones and it goes at a much faster rate than the water that's just in the rock, the
Right.
solid rock.
Sure.
So USGS doesn't really address the fracture zones. That's what Ken claims makes it different.
Right.
And in regard to Denver and Mike's and Arnie's reservation, Ken seems very confident of what he's produced. So we need to
This
get
is true.
together.
That last statement is very true.
I think that's where it's going to stay for now until at some time the USGS can speak to it otherwise and maybe develop I don't want to say it this way necessarily, but a broader argument, because we can have our criticism of Ken Colm's report, which we certainly do, but I don't know where else we can take it at this point except making that vocal and continuing to make it vocal, as Arnie is saying, until such time as the USGS report either supports or rejects what it is we're claiming. So I'd like to leave it there, but unless, yeah, go
I
ahead.
think USGS doesn't really address a lot of these local questions in the Glen Canyon aquifer, or probably in Valley Fill either, but at least we're talking about Glen Canyon, so it's hard to compare them exactly.
Sure.
So your argument is that fracture may be further up to get to the springs, further up the Mill Creek.
Further up in the LaSalle's, yes. Whatever drainage it's in or wherever the crack is. But my argument is that the total amount of water we have in the Grand Canyon Aquifer is not necessarily related to the amount of water coming out of Mill Creek as it comes down through the valley there. So Ken's kind of got the whole surface area, and he's got all this water coming down, and that theoretically is Moab's source water. What I'm trying to say is that
But
the
it is
water,
coming down that
Well, the reason I
it is
asked
coming
is
down that drainage. The amount of water that he says coming out of the bottom
Just for the
out
sake of the
there,
meeting.
I don't have any problem with that. I have, the amount of water that he has coming, that's supplying our spring water, and that's our amount of water that we have, because it's not supplying our spring water. Okay? That's my point. His report that says there's that much water coming out of the pipe, or coming out of the bottom of the Mill Creek drainage, I like those numbers. Sure, there were some problems with those numbers, but the concept, when it's all said and done, yes, there's this much water at the bottom of Mill Creek here, okay? But whether or not that's Moab's water supply is my problem. Moab City's water supply, because I don't believe it is.
This report is also now going to go through peer review, right? Isn't that what we were saying before? Maybe it's UGS?
I know I've been trying to back off on it and let the USGS the UGS have a
Sure.
shot at it, okay?
Let's take that as our next opportunity to review it, or if you want it to be in, I guess that isn't protocol, but inserting that comment somehow into the UGS reviews so that they are aware of this ahead of time would be meaningful.
I'm sure I will make you aware of that issue.
Okay, great.
Arnie, Mr. Water Quality Man, if I may interrupt you, because I have a personal issue in this. Is the water at 8,000, 9,000 feet up on the mountains generally considered to be free of Giardia, or not?
Mike,
I wouldn't think so.
I drank a bunch of it.
are you gonna ask?
You
Tom
have,
or-
You tell us, Mike.
you have cattle grazing up there. So you have the possibility for, and there's not really beavers up there. They don't really carry, cattle doesn't really carry Giardia like.
I'll let you know in another few days.
So if you're drinking water that's coming out of the ground in the LaSalle's, if it's coming out of the ground, I don't have a problem.
It's entirely possible that it's fractured way up above that, and it's coming down the fins, like he supposes. And the fractures are deep.
And the fractures are deep, yes.
Yes.
But they're not connected to Mill Creek below 7,000 feet.
They have to be connected to.
All right,
You ever had Giardia?
let's cut it off for the moment. There's so much we could continue to talk about, and I would encourage us to do it and
3D the earth.
create a particular space for it when we want to talk about it, which is this. So good, let's keep talking about it. But let's move on for now with the idea that these comments remain front and center, unanswered, and to be revisited upon the peer review of Ken Combs' report. And then as well, when the USGS releases its report, though, as we're saying, they may not align in such a way to make that determination, but maybe something will be useful at that time to further address these concerns. For now, unless anyone has any other comments, we'll move on to the final agenda item, outdoor watering campaign.
I
Go
just
ahead.
had something that I read in the paper. Salt Lake Tribune, they did a report on global warming and how it was going to affect the ski industry and throughout the nation. And they went through and did an analysis 2030 to 2080. Did anybody see that in the Tribune? And they went through all the ski resorts and the ones that were viable, that they thought were viable, and the ones they thought weren't. And it was a pretty good chart, and the upshot was that Utah was, of course, going to be viable until 2080. And a lot of the others were not, so.
Enough precipitation,
Well, I think it has to do with the temperature.
I see.
When was that?
That was this past week. And if you wanted, it was sort of an interesting article, I wish I would have,
It was in the Tribune?
in the Tribune.
Oh, I can get it on my little e-edition kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they're assuming that the precipitation will be the same, it's just a question of whether it's gonna be
cold,
snow or
cold
not.
enough, they were talking about having to move the Olympics two weeks into the February, or at least the Special Olympics. But that Utah was still viable.
Yeah, because Park City's making a vibe for the Olympics again, and they want to
They
be the
probably-
first carbon neutral Olympics.
Yeah.
So they probably paid for that study.
That's what I was going to say. Who paid for it? Well, that's interesting. We shall see.
I think that you just passed around the same thing. The Karas Moab Happenings article, it's quite informative. I was just reading it, and I question one thing about it. It says that when she's talking about watering vegetable gardens, and she's talking about using drip systems, she said that, remember that watering the root zone requires at least 1 gallon per plant, so with 1 gallon emitters, water for 1 hour. And does that seem right? I mean, I have a drip system in my garden, and I would never water it for more than 10 minutes. And it gets,
That seems right to me based on the idea in the hot season where you want to soak deeply versus water for 10 minutes and then 10 minutes again later. That seems to apply to me more maybe to deeper rooted vegetation versus annuals.
vegetables.
Um,
Yeah, this is about
yeah.
vegetable gardens.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, our vegetable garden is not suffering at all, in case anybody wants some vegetables.
I'll trade you some Africa.
We have all kinds of stuff, yeah.
Oh, Kyle's got a lot of his own.
That's a
Yeah.
question I would pose to Cara. She'd have a better
But
sense.
it's
Yep.
I think it's great that we get this coverage in the
Yeah.
happening, so thanks, Rosemary, for making that happen.
Yep.
And the box ads came out more than, I think, 2 weeks in a row or something
I
about
saw those.
the sprinkling in the lawns, and I thought that looked really good.
Good. Yep. I think we're already on to our outdoor watering campaign then. The only other thing I'll add is that Lisa's been posting these little water history blurbs. I've set up a bunch for the rest of the summer, and I'll keep making them. Some people are interacting with them, which is good. Just another piece of the puzzle. So, but if, like I said, if anyone ever wants to contribute or add or edit or has some serious complaint about something I'm saying, just let me know.
I think Carrie Bailey's been
She's been active.
reposting those
Mhm.
things on Facebook.
Yep.
Cool.
So they're getting out there. So thanks to Lisa for that. I don't have anything other than that. If no one has anything else about outdoor watering campaign education, and we'll move to adjournment.
I have one other thing.
Sure, go ahead.
I know that at least Arnie, I'm not sure if others have been following along with the water rights applications that are published in the paper every week and the public notices.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in I haven't had a
but-
chance to look in the paper in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so this week's, or maybe, yeah, I was on vacation, so it was the one that came last week. There are 3 different applications for one LLC, and one of them's quite large. I want to say it's, I was actually going to go run and get the paper, but I think it's like 78 acre feet, and it was called something like Brownwater or Brownfields or something, but I might have that wrong, but it sounds like a developer, and it sounds like a lot of water. So I think my hunch is that the water attorney isn't necessarily following those applications, but it's the kind of thing that the city would potentially protest, right?
Maybe
Right.
depending on the version where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't read the fine print. I just noticed that there was one corporate entity that was requesting 3 different,
Points of diversion.
yeah, and 2 of them were quite small, but one of them was quite large.
In
So-
Grant County?
Yeah, it's in our paper.
Maybe it's Colorado River.
I guess
Oh,
I
no,
will,
if
I
it
guess
was
I
the
will look,
ground-
I will find some time to look into it.
Well, you're asking me technical questions, I'm sorry.
Yeah, they don't give a very good look at it. I mean, they give
Yeah, it's like,
township and ranges.
yeah, I know. So,
I'll look it up.
yeah, I was gonna, Lisa Church has a copy of the paper. I have one at home, but,
Yeah, but you need to get online to figure out where the points of diversion are. He just says 6 miles north, he says 6 miles southeast of Moab, and that's like, whatever.
well, at least that's helpful, But anyway, it's just that thing where the limit is 6.75
Five,
acre feet.
and they're asking for more.
A lot, yeah. Yeah.
You'll look at it, Arnie?
I will.
Okay.
Don't know when, but I will find time.
Kyle, did you have something? I thought I heard you throw up a hand. No? Anyone else have anything else for now?
Well, I have a little anecdotal thing, so I have water rights at my house, and they actually finally came out, and when I, send in my paperwork, and they decreased my amount, and they said, yeah, you weren't irrigating as much as you had requested. And so then I wrote back to Mark, and I said, yeah, that's because my spring is broken, and I can't irrigate. So I would like that amount back. So I haven't heard back from them, but I thought it was really interesting that they went out and actually were checking about how much you're irrigating.
You're not the first person that's been a little upset that they have tried to take some of their water rights away, Kyle. Can you believe that?
Yeah. They didn't take mine.
They didn't take yours?
No.
You had all your stuff going when you got it. When they showed up, he had all his water running.
I flooded the zone.
Well, I would have liked to, but I can't get an irrigation guy.
Right, it's my,
They actually sent me a map of the property and showing me which part was irrigated.
wow.
Yeah?
Was that one of those maps where the water is red? Those are awesome. That Utah Division of Water Rights, if you look that up and look on maps, they have a way that they claim they can see what's wet, and they can see if you're
Yes.
irrigating because it's a
They
nice
do have
path.
that. Yes.
They sent it to me, I don't know.
They're
No, mine was just
Amazingly
hatched and
efficient.
just said, yeah.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we will adjourn at 3:44.
Was there a second?
I'll second.
Okay,
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
thank you.
Mike, can I ask you a question?
One other thing I wanted to mention to you.
Can I